Welcome to the Architecture Film Festival Rotterdam 2019. This will be the first talk show with 3 guests on our festival. I'll introduce them to you. This is Lotte Schreiber on my left hand. She's the maker of such stuff as dreams are made of. Joseph Hillel from Canada, from the film City Dreamers, and Andrea Zimmerman from Munich. Well, let's start with your film, and I propose we watch a clip of your film which gives an idea of what you've been working on.
Wir haben uns kritisch gefragt, welche Möglichkeiten im sozialen Wohnbau liegen. Es muss doch eine Alternative geben zwischen den anonymen Blockverbauungen ohne Wahlfreiheit für den Einzelnen und den Zersiedelungen an den Stadträndern.
Also meine Frau war nicht so wahnsinnig begeistert von der Idee eines gemeinsamen Wohnprojekts.
Wir sind eine Kommune, wir waren einfach völlig fremd.
Während das Ernährungsbewusstsein immer mehr in den Vordergrund rückt, ist das Interesse am ökologischen Bauen und am gesunden Wohnen noch relativ gering.
Well, Lotte, you made a wonderful film about co-housing projects in Austria, an overview of co-housing projects of the past 40 years. Can you tell something about the background? Why did you want to make a film on co-housing?
Well, my background is that I've been studying architecture, and I grew up in Graz and made my university at Graz. And I grew up basically next to 2 of these housing projects. I wasn't aware that they were co-housing projects at the time. I was a child and a teenager, but after I've been at university, I found out about it, and I got interested in that idea of getting together to make your own dream of living come true. And this goes a lot beyond the idea of architecture as designing your own living space. It's an idea more or less about some sort of society, also that most of these people, they were not happy with what society offered to them. So some of them, they founded their own schools, their own kindergartens, and in the end, they've built their own housing projects.
Well, these projects are typical signs, of course, of the late 60s, when people were thinking of creating a new kind of society, the beginning of the 70s. But it's funny that these ideas are coming back. They're very of this time as well. Maybe that's the reason that you wanted to show people we have been there already.
Yes, we did the film in 2. It was an architect friend of mine who asked me if I was interested as a filmmaker, because I mainly do films for the past 20 years almost. So I shifted from architecture to film, but my interest has always been and remained architecture. And in the end, yes, we decided we just want to give an overview, and that the housing projects that has been thought of in the 60s and 70s, they had been it was a little bit, I have the feeling that it was a bigger struggle for them that time, because they had to, and the collaboration with the architects and the architecture was more experimental that time, whereas nowadays the projects are a lot more pragmatic. in the sense of time, but also in the sense of architecture a little bit.
Yeah, and people tend to invest money. They become developers themselves, and
Yes.
it's always good to see. Lots of people say, well, these ideals of the 70s, they were all there for that period, and the marriages broke up, and therefore the products were not successful, and therefore it's very funny to see that lots of people stayed in that co-housing project. They're still living there.
Yes.
Did that surprise you?
Well, in the end, not, because people are completely happy. When you watch the film, you can see that these people identify 100% and more with their projects, and they and me neither couldn't imagine to live somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I can understand that they stay there.
Yeah.
It's their dream that they made come true. So why should they leave their dreams?
And was there kind of a mission for you when you made this film and said, well, it can be done? It is this kind of living can add a new or a well-known social vibe to a city. It can help a city staying alive.
Yes, that's definitely what these projects do. They have a great impact on their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
That's what I experienced a lot while doing the research. And I think like city councils and communes should support more these sort of projects, because they gain a lot for their cities and communes out of these projects. Yeah.
So it's a kind of learning from the past.
It's a bit, of course, it's learning from the past. And nowadays, especially in Vienna, and we're showing one of these projects, there is architecture offices that have been specialized into co-housing projects.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and they develop like project after project. And the commune, the city of Vienna, has also recognized the positive impact on new development areas in Vienna, and they fund these projects, they support these sort of projects.
Well, that's an optimistic view for the future. As we are in this festival, making with all the films kind of a trip around the world, we have an image of the world if you watch all the films, and maybe coincidental, you are all involved in films that have a view of the past. You are you made a film of 4 ladies of 80 to 90 years old who were
88 to 98.
88 to 98, which is amazing, and you interviewed them and you had a view of the past as well, and you went back to the Bauhaus, which celebrates its 100th anniversary. So if you listen to this co-housing project, do they exist in Canada as well, as you know?
Yes, it does exist. I didn't know when I saw your film, I didn't know that like in the 70s, they were talking already about compost and recycling in that, I don't remember that building, but I was surprised that it was so progressive and that it was so developed in Austria. I don't think that we were talking about compost in that scale in Montreal. It's pretty recent, and now we're more serious about it.
So you're from Vienna, you're from Montreal, you're from Munich, big cities, and we all suffering, all these cities are suffering from a division between the rich and the poor, and these are the projects that show a kind of coherence between different levels of income, different social levels, and it works.
Yeah, it's easier. Especially for me, it was surprising to find out that it's not only the aspect of having an alternative living or making my own dream come true, but it's also a financial aspect, because it's easier to finance your dream in a group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but tell that to the banks, because they don't want to pre-finance any initiative with a group. Then you have to combine, you come with lawyers, and you have to find a kind of a system how to make that work. How's that in Munich, for example? Munich is a fast-growing city as well.
It is fast-growing, and we have the problem that affordable housing is really difficult to find in the inner city. So the city has already problems that policemen or nurses or whoever, they can't afford it, they have to move out. And I think this gentrification is maybe then the consequence is that we are losing part of our society and of the livelihood, because people move in because they think they are living artists and small shop owners and they love the spirit, and real estate agents sell that. But then everybody moves in, the rent goes up, or some apartments are even empty, but renovated, and then it changes the inner cities, I think, and then co-housing projects are really good, and I think Vienna is far ahead with politics regarding housing than Munich. Yeah.
While working on your film, you had an idea that this could be the answer to the near future of creating cities, or are these buildings or societies too small for doing that?
I think it's not the answer for mass housing. That can't be, because you have to put a lot of time and energy into doing these projects.
Yeah.
These projects that are portrayed in my film are all bottom-up projects, yeah, and you cannot you cannot ask a working class family who is really concerned about earning the daily living to put more hours into developing such a housing projects. But still, they can, I'm convinced that they can be models for bigger ideas. And I think, yes, Vienna is,
Yeah, there are some examples of the 30s in Vienna, and can be found in Munich as well. Well, thank you. Yeah.
It was the beauty of this to see that a community was taking care of them. They were designing their lives the way they want to do it. I don't think it would be possible for a large scale, but the way that the example that you showed, it was nice to see that. Okay, I'm investing in my community. I'm investing myself in. That's the beauty of it.
It's a very optimistic vision.
Yes.
Well, what made me optimistic was watching your film, The City Dreamers. These four, I wouldn't call them women. I would call them girls. These girls of 88 till 98, still going strong, still so enthusiastic about the time they lived and worked in, and showed their women power.
And still working.
Still working. Shall we watch a clip?
Sure.
Je vivais dans une espèce de nuage. Rien n'était très réel, n'est-ce pas? Alors, quand j'ai commencé à faire le bâtiment CRM, là, j'étais vraiment quelque part, je faisais quelque chose que j'adorais. Je savais que mon père voulait finalement construire un bâtiment à New York. Ça me passionnait parce que, vous savez, le moment que vous décidez de construire dans une ville, vous changez les choses et puis vous pouvez les faire pour le mieux, pour le pire. Et pourquoi est-ce qu'on ne fait pas toujours pour le mieux? Mon job à moi était de voir à ce que mise fasse ce bâtiment. Il fallait que je m'impose pour commencer, ça c'est vrai. J'avais beaucoup étudié et j'étais passionné. Et je savais ce qui était correct.
What a wonderful clip, and Phyllis Lambert still working at the Architecture Museum in Montreal.
CCA,
At the CCA. Where did you got the idea from that you started wanted to make a film about these women?
It started with. I had heard about that story of that woman, Blanche Lemko van Ginkel, who saved old Montreal. I didn't know that they were going to destroy that part of the city, 250 years old. And I had heard about this story, but I didn't know that she was still alive. And one day I understand that she's passing by Montreal to receive an honoris causa, and I go and meet her, and then I meet that very sparkling woman. I wanted to do a film on architecture again. I had done a previous film 15 years ago, but I didn't. It was on Mise van der Rohe. I didn't want to do another film on someone who was not present. So when I saw Blanche, it was an instant flash. I wanted to. So I got a camera. The next day, I went to shoot the convocation she had at the McGill University, and it went like that. I went to meet with her in Toronto. She talked to me about her friends, Phyllis Lambert, Cornelia Hollander. And then instead of telling the story of one woman, I decided to have a choir, a chœur, and then I spontaneously thought about Denise Scott Brown, who could fit in that quatuor, and it was the start of that big adventure.
It is amazing that when you listen to the women and you see their work and how they work, that they slowly grew into that status of becoming iconic. And it's an example to any woman nowadays that it can be done. So, but they were living in a time when the majority of architects and the planners and the decision makers were. How did they dealt with that?
I think they had that flame all the time, and I have the feeling that the adversity that they have, that boys' club in front of them, was the trigger to make them to give them that strain to make that career that they have. It's almost 70 years of professional work that they have and it's been a fight for them all along. I think that to fight like that was the motor, and of course they won't take their retirement, that's for sure, none of them.
Yeah, you realize when you see the pictures, there's always man, but they hardly ever mention it in the film, because for them they make it look as it was quite normal.
Yes. It's normal, except maybe for Denise. Denise could say the word. She could say that she's a feminist, but for Phyllis, Cornelia or Blanche, there was no. They were doing what they had to do, and it was not under a badge or a group of women. They were just working in a more human way. I found very clearly, like in a more like a collective way. It was they have a different way than men at the time. They were always talking about community. They were not striving for themselves. I mean, Phyllis, she could have been like retiring on an island a long time ago, but she saved the area in Montreal. She had that big center, CCA, and they all each of them have worked for the common welfare, and that's the big. That's what impressed me from the start.
Yeah, that impressed me in the film as well, and. People are bound to say, when you talk about women in architecture, you need to fight for your position, etc., and the outcome will be typical feminine. I don't like that. I mean, we have equal positions, of course. Well, that's something maybe you can tell about, because Bauhaus was, well, everybody said it was an optimistic time, there was a new time to arrive, and there was no gender clash, but there was a gender clash.
There was a gender clash, definitely. Especially at the beginning. And I have to say, my topic is in the 60s, so when Gropius planned and sketched his last buildings, and not so many things had changed. But when I did my research in Harvard and MIT archives, the director said, "Oh, please, you don't make a Me Too documentary about Bauhaus, because you could find plenty of stories." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm not interested in that primarily, but I think it's interesting for another movie or another topic. Yeah, definitely."
Yeah, and the way women were, well, not treated, but Gropius thought that women weren't able to think in a three-dimensional way,
Yeah.
and therefore they were sent to that part of Bauhaus where they had to weave and only being busy with the two-dimensional
exactly,
project.
like only with carpets and tapestry and maybe wood, but also like China, the production of China, and this kind of design. But in architecture, they wanted to be the pure male group. Yeah.
Design furniture as well. Like I just saw an exhibit on Charlotte Perriand.
That's of course then putting women in the same position. Well, the interior is for women and the outside is for men. So maybe you recognize that in the design of all that co-housing, that the women always are, okay, that's for you and we do this. Or did you see that division in thinking towards a new project?
No, actually not. But most of the older projects are done by male architects. Yeah, like the first two ones at least. No, actually,
the
three.
problems were discussed with the male, but the solutions came from the women.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think in the times of the Bauhaus, this is really, and I'm really curious about your film. This is really something that has to be talked about and to be looked at. And I'm very happy that you did this film, and especially you too, because I still, when I was a student in the 90s, I heard that when I was an architecture student, there was some guy from the university who stood up at some panel talk and said, you women, you girls, you shouldn't study architecture because in the end you're gonna...
Shame on him, shame on him. And now that these women are looking back in their lives, you see they are quite modest. And but is there a feeling that they have really achieved something?
Yes, I think so. They are very proud of what they've done, accomplished, and I've done a film on these 4 dreamers, but I could have done a film on each of them more easily because they have enough. They have accomplished enough, each of them, to be. But I think they are already very well saluted by their community. They all have a catalog of price in there, and
sure.
Doctorate, PhD. Yes, they have tons of recognitions.
And they've taught, and they're still lecturing. So that's wonderful.
You saw Phyllis in that clip, but. And Phyllis in Montreal, she's an icon, but still, sometimes I notice that they're not recognized. The architects in general are not recognized for their input in our society. But these women, what they've done, especially in my city, Phyllis. I mean, we could build a statue for her.
Well, you already built a statue with your film, and it's wonderful that we can show these careers. I really liked your film. Well, let's go move. We already did a little bit to the Bauhaus. We're celebrating, and there are many films on the Bauhaus, but yours is very special. Shall we have a look on the clip first?
Do we have a clip, yeah?
When Gropius visited the old porcelain factory, he found small plants on the tables. He asked the workers, "Why do you have plants next to the machines?" And they said, "We're surrounded by porcelain dust all day, so we need some color to rest our eyes from all the white." We philosophized, drank French red wine, and listened to jazz. And suddenly the idea of a flower pot for all came to Grope. If the workers wanted color, then color they should have. what they got, which is how the pink flamingos came to Zep.
Well, the audience might say when they see this clip, it looks a little bit funny, but we are watching a virtual reality clip.
Exactly.
So you're supposed to have this helmet on and watch around, and it's an amazing experience because you really go into the thing. Was that the meaning of you when you wanted to make this film, that this only could be told through virtual reality?
I mean, actually, it's the best means. What I thought, it's the first time that I did virtual reality. I work with a company, they're very experienced technically, but I'm from a documentary filmmaker side. And we could have made a documentary about Bauhaus in Bavaria, but then I found it's easier and it's more logical to go to those places that are very remote in Bavaria. Nobody knows about it. The factories are still in work. They're still producing china and glass, so nobody can go there. We had only 1 day of shooting in each of the locations. Yeah. And I thought it might be a very good idea to make this an immersive story and to take the local story to national, and now it's international. And so it can travel, and you can. It's a very good experience. And I think virtual reality is very often used in architecture, because there are only two sides where you can get that from. It's the game industry, and very often the stories are a bit horror and scary. And on the other hand, you have architecture, and the architects are most likely, in love with a vector-based space. But I wanted to combine that with a storytelling. And so that was a very good experience for me to do storytelling within a volumetric storytelling and immersive. And I really enjoyed that, and I hope the audience enjoys it too, yeah.
Well, it's a thrilling experience. And what do you think? What do you think will this be really the next stage for architecture films, that you really can enter or have the feeling that you are inside the building?
I think, the feeling being inside, because it's always difficult to convince an audience of architecture and the feeling and the emotion you have in space when you have it two-dimensional. It's also, I think, very, when you have exhibitions about architecture, you always need like this models. Do you say models? Yeah. And still it's not the same. So I think it's a very good way of showing that and taking people there, especially if you can't see it. Even Harvard, the lecturer, he said, when he watched it, it's the first time I see that building, and I thought about it and I talked about it with my students for years, and I haven't been there. So he was jumping around, and he was telling, you have to watch that. Yeah. Now you can finally be in it. Yeah. And I also have shown it to Alex Tsivjanovic, the companion or the co-worker and friend and colleague of Gropius. He was 95. And he still had his office until he was 90. So I took the experience back, and I gave him the glasses, and he was overwhelmed. He couldn't take it. It was really like a trip. Yeah. Yeah,
I can imagine. What do you think of these new techniques? Would you like to experiment with it, or do you think it's complete other way of storytelling?
I don't know enough about it, but I would like to experience it. I don't know how the narrative can work there, but it's very. I'm very curious to explore that for sure. Yeah.
Well, I think the narrative is completely different because you move through space, and that movement is the narrative. One could say. Yeah. And can you meet other people? Are you going that far that maybe you can meet Walter Gropius himself, and that he teaches you how to think?
Well, yeah. My intention was to go into the mind of an architect as well. What do they think? What do they feel? What are their considerations when they are planning a building? And the clip you had shown with the flamingos was that, because I went there into the factory, and somebody told me there used to be flamingos in that little pavilion, and I was like, flamingos? How did that come? And so I had to find out, and I got the information from Alex Tsivjanovic and from other contemporaries and from relatives of Rosenthal, because I always thought, and that was my preconception, that Bauhaus is very strict, very pure, very Yeah, and I thought, how do flamingos come together with that, you know, that concept? And then they told me the story that it was completely different, that they were philosophizing about it because they wanted to fulfill the needs of the workers. That is really like something I discovered as well. They were like hipsters with co-working spaces and spare time departments where people could sit together, they could play together, they could share their spare time together instead of just working. They wanted to have a livable and a great space for workers.
So there you are, and you mentioned already one of the problems we are all dealing with when we make films on architecture and living in city. It is about people, don't you think? If you look for stories.
Yes, it's. We were talking about I don't think I did an historic film. The women are very actual, and their concern is always the people. It's the base of it's their first motivation. So and it's more interesting as well, I think.
Sure, we recognize it more than just blunt space,
exactly.
Don't you think?
Yeah, of course. Architecture is done. In the first phase, it's been thought by architects, but I think in the second phase, it's done by the users, by the residents, and so architecture without people is a ruin in the end, isn't it?
You formulated very well. Well, may I thank you all three for participating in this first talk on architecture. Thank you very much for coming.
Us. Thank you.
Bedankt.
Good luck with the festival.